Peace, everybody. It's your girl, Morgan Renee Myers, tuning in for another story time with Morma. We are in a new book now. I am going to be reading The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. So, there's a lot. I'm just now realizing I'm outside and you can hear traffic. So, I'll try my best to speak up. Nonetheless, I've been wanting to read this book. Got this book some time ago. I went to an event this past weekend at White Harvest Farms in Jacksonville, Florida, and they had like a library where you make purchase and the purchase go toward some kids program. And so I saw this book there, and it didn't make me remember because I knew I had it and wanted to read it, but it just put in my mind, hey, you are finishing up or have finished the last read, let this be your next read. And I also had started, when I was still reading the last book, Trying to Sleep in the Bed You Made, I had started reading the Medical Apartheid, but I was so ready to get through that other book that I just stopped reading these. And it's kind of heavy, it's kind of dense, it's wordy, it's technical, but we're going to learn and grow together, not only in knowledge, but in wisdom, and about how the oppressive system of America and black bodies and how those two coincide. So that's why I want to finish this, because we had started on it, and then Henrietta Lacks is going to tie into this. So Medical Apartheid is by Harriet A. Washington, and The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is by Rebecca Skloot. Now, if you know anything about me, I like to read the intro, the prologue, the this and the that. So let's just get right into it. I'm not going to speak much on Henrietta's life because we're going to learn about it through this book. But on the cover it reads, "Doctors took her cells without asking. Those cells never died. They launched a medical revolution and a multi-million-dollar industry. More than 20 years later, her children found out their lives would never be the same." Okay. A bunch of accolades from different business journals and stuff up front. We're not going to do all that now. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Alright. And we got different contents. I do like to sometimes read the table of contents. She has quite a bit. So I'll skip over it. But part 1 is life. Part 2 is death. Part 3 is immortality. Again, we are reading The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Let's start with a few words about this book. Thank you for everybody that's tuning in. Please share, like, subscribe, and comment to my YouTube channel. I'm recording currently on Instagram and Facebook, but I upload to my YouTube channel. It's my name, Morgan Myers, MYERS. There should be a red logo with a yellow M, or you can type in Storytime with Morma on YouTube, and I should come up and you should find me. So a few words about this book. This is a work of nonfiction. Note, nonfiction meaning what? Fiction means not true. Nonfiction meaning true. It's not fiction. This is a work of nonfiction. No names have been changed. No characters invented. No events fabricated. While writing this book, this is Rebecca talking, I conducted more than 1,000 hours of interviews with family and friends of Henrietta Lacks. She's giving you her credibility. She's giving you why she can talk about this woman's life and her story, okay? Somebody had to do the research. You wasn't doing it. All right, let me read the book. I conducted more than 1,000 hours of interviews with family and friends of Henrietta Lacks, as well as lawyers, ethicists, scientists, and journalists who've written about the Lacks family. I also rely on extensive archival photo and document scientific and historical research and the personal journals of Henrietta's daughter, Deborah Lacks. I don't know if I showed y'all the book good, but get into the book real quick. Okay? And then get into... One moment. How they open the book. Okay, Instagram, y'all see too. All right. I've done my best to capture the language with which each person spoke and wrote. Dialogue appears in native dialects. Passages from diaries and other personal writings are quoted exactly as written. As one of Henrietta's relatives said to me, if you pretty up how people spoke and change the things they said, that's dishonest. It's taking away their lives, their experiences, and their selves. In many places, I've adopted the words interviewees use to describe their worlds and experiences. In doing so, I've used the language of their times and backgrounds, including words such as color. Members of the Lax family often refer to John Hopkins as John Hopkins, and I've kept their usage when they're speaking. Anything written in the first person is Deborah Lax's voice, and Deborah Lax's voice is a quote of her speaking, edited for length and occasional clarity. Since Henrietta Lacks died decades before I began writing this book, I relied on interviews, legal documents, and her medical records to recreate scenes from her life. In those scenes, dialogue is either deduced from the written record or quoted verbatim as it was recounted to me in an interview. Whenever possible, I conducted multiple interviews with multiple sources to ensure accuracy. The extract from Henrietta's medical record in Chapter 1 is a summary of many disparate notations. The word Heli, capital H, lowercase e, capital L, lowercase a, Heli, used to refer to the cells grown from Henrietta Lax's cervix, occurs throughout the book. It is pronounced Heli, H-E-E-L-A-H, in case I was having trouble pronouncing that or didn't know that. That would be helpful. It is pronounced Heli. About chronology, that word be tripping me up. Chronology. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. Dates for specific research refer to when the research was conducted, not when it was published. In some cases, those dates are approximate because there is no record of exact start dates. Also, because I move back and forth between multiple stories and scientific discoveries occur over many years, there are places in the book where, for the sake of clarity, I describe scientific discoveries sequentially, even though they took place during the same general period of time. The history of Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cells raises important issues regarding science, ethics, race, and class. I've done my best to present them clearly within the narrative of the Lacks story, and I've included an afterword addressing the current legal and ethical debate surrounding tissue ownership and research. There is much more to say on all the issues, but that is beyond the scope of this book, so I will leave it for scholars and experts in the field to address. I hope readers will forgive any omissions. All right, let's get into it. And that's also why I want to accompany reading this with medical apartheid, because like she said, she's going to be talking about issues regarding science, ethics, race, and class, and so is medical apartheid. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. We must not see any person as an abstraction. Instead, we must see in every person a universe with its own secrets, with its own treasures, with its own sources of anguish, and with some measure of triumph. Eli Wiesel said that from the Nazi Doctors and the Nuremberg Code. All right, let's get into it. Prologue. The woman in the photograph, Henrietta Lacks. There's a photo on my wall of a woman I've never met. Its left corner torn and patched together with tape. She looks straight into the camera and smiles, hands on hips, dress suit neatly pressed, lips painted deep red. It's the late 1940s and she hasn't yet reached the age of 30. Her light brown skin is smooth, her eyes still young and playful, oblivious to the tumor growing inside her, a tumor that will leave her 5 children motherless and change the future of medicine. Beneath the photo, a caption says her name is Henrietta Lacks, Helen Lane, or Helen Larson. No one knows who took that picture, but it's appeared hundreds of times in magazines and science textbooks, on blogs, and laboratory walls. She's usually identified as Helen Lane, but often she has no name at all. She's simply called Heli, the code name given to the world's first immortal human cells. Her cells, cut from her cervix just months before she died. Her real name is Henrietta Lacks. I've spent years staring at that photo, wondering what kind of life she led, what happened to her children, and what she'd think about cells from her cervix living on forever, bought, sold, packaged, and shipped by the trillions to laboratories around the world. I've tried to imagine how she'd feel knowing that her cells went up in the first space missions to see what would happen to human cells in zero gravity, or that they helped with some of the most important advances in medicine, the polio vaccine, chemotherapy, cloning, gene mapping, in vitro fertilization. I'm pretty sure that she, like most of us, will be shocked to hear that there are trillions more of her cells growing in laboratories now than there ever were in her body. There's no way of knowing exactly how many of Henrietta's cells are alive today. One scientist estimates that if you could pile all Heli cells ever grown onto a scale, they weigh more than 50 million metric tons, an inconceivable number given that an individual cell weighs almost nothing. Another scientist calculated that if you could lay all Heli cells ever grown. In the end, they wrap around the earth at least 3 times, spanning more than 350 million feet. In her prime, Henrietta herself stood only a bit over 5 feet tall. I first learned about HeLa cells and the woman behind them in 1988, 37 years after her death, when I was 16 and sitting in a community college biology class. My instructor, Donald Deffler, a gnomish, balding man, paced at the front of the lecture hall and flipped on an overhead projector. He pointed to 2 diagrams that appeared on the wall behind him. They were semantics of cell reproduction cycle, but to me they just looked like a neon-colored mess of arrows, squares, and circles with words I didn't understand, like MPF triggering a chain reaction of protein activations. I was a kid who failed freshman year at the regular public high school because she never showed up. I transferred to an alternative school that offered dream studies instead of biology, so I was taking Deffler's class for high school credit, which meant that I was sitting in a college lecture hall at 16 with words like mitosis and kinase inhibitors flying around. I was completely lost. Do we have to memorize everything on those diagrams? One student yelled. Yes, Deffler said. We had to memorize the diagrams, and yes, they'd be on the test, but that didn't matter right then. What he wanted us to understand was that cells are amazing things. There are about 100 trillion of them in our bodies, each so small that several thousand could fit on the period at the end of this sentence. They make up all our tissues, muscle, bone, blood, which in turn make up our organs. Under the microscope, a cell looks a lot like a fried egg. It has a white, the cytoplasm, that's full of water and proteins to keep it fed, and a yolk, the nucleus, that holds all the genetic information that makes you, you. The cytoplasm buzzes like a New York City street. It's crammed full of molecules and vessels endlessly shuttling enzymes and sugars from one part of the cell to another, pumping water, nutrients, and oxygen in and out of the cell. All the while, little cytoplasmic factories work 24/7, cranking out sugars, fats, proteins, and energy to keep the whole thing running and feed the nucleus, the brains of the operation. Inside every nucleus within each cell is in your body, there is an identical copy of your entire genome. Oh, wow. That genome tells cells when to grow and divide and make sure they do their jobs, whether that's controlling your heartbeat or helping your brain understand the words on this page. Deffler paced the front of the classroom, telling us how mitosis, the process of cell division, makes it possible for embryos to grow into babies, and for our bodies to create new cells for healing wounds or replenishing blood we've lost. It was beautiful, he said, like perfectly choreographed dance. All it takes is one small mistake anywhere in the division process for cells to start growing out of control, he told us. Just one enzyme misfiring, just one wrong protein activation, and you could have cancer. Mitosis goes haywire, which is how it spreads. We learned that by studying cancer cells in culture, Deffler said. He grinned and spun to face the board where he wrote 2 words in enormous print. Wait a minute. He said, we learned that by studying cancer cells in culture, Deffler said. He grinned and spun to face the board where he wrote 2 words in enormous print. Henrietta lacks. Henrietta died in 1951 from a viscous case of cervical cancer, he told us. But before she died, a surgeon took samples of her tumor and put them in a petri dish. Scientists have been trying to keep human cells alive in culture for decades, but they all eventually died. Henrietta's were different. They reproduced an entire generation every 24 hours, but they never stopped. They became the first immortal human cells ever grown in a laboratory. Henrietta's cells have now been living outside her body far longer than they ever lived inside it, Deffler said. If we went to almost any cell culture lab in the world and opened its freezers, he told us, we'd probably find millions, if not billions, of Henrietta cells in small vials on ice. What? Hold on, let me back up. I know I ain't read what I just read. Henrietta's cells have now been living outside her body far longer than they ever lived inside it, Deffler said. If we went to almost any cell culture lab in the world, Craig, that's United States, South America, Central America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Antarctica, almost any cell culture lab in the world and open its freezers, he told us, we probably find millions, if not billions, of Henrietta cells in small vials on ice. Wow. Her cells were part of research into the genes that cause cancer and those that suppress it. They help develop drugs for treating herpes, leukemia, influenza, hemophilia, and Parkinson's disease. And they've been used to study lactose digestion, sexually transmitted diseases, appendicitis, human longevity, mosquito mating, and the negative cellular effects of working in sewers. What? Their chromosomes and proteins have been studied with such detail and precision that scientists know their every quirk. Like guinea pigs and mice, Henrietta cells have become the standard laboratory workhorse. HeLa cells were one of the most important things that happened to medicine in the last 100 years, Defler said. Then, matter-of-factly, almost as an afterthought, he said, she was a black woman. He erased her name in one fast swipe and blew the chalk from his hands. Class was over. As the other students filed out the room, I sat thinking, that's it? That's all we get? There has to be more to the story. I followed Defler to his office. Where was she from? I asked. Did she know how important her cells were? Did she have any children? I wish I could tell you, he said, but no one knows anything about her. After class, I ran home and threw myself onto my bed with my biology textbook. I looked up cell culture in the index, and there she was, a small parenthetical. In culture, cancer cells can go on dividing indefinitely if they have a continual supply of nutrients and thus are said to be immortal. A striking example is a cell line that has been reproducing in culture since 1951. Cells of this line are called HeLa cells because their original source was a tumor removed from a woman named Henrietta Lacks. That was it. I looked up HeLa in my parents' encyclopedia, then my dictionary. No Henrietta. As I graduated from high school and worked my way through college toward a biology degree, HeLa cells were omnipresent. I heard about them in histology, neurology, pathology. I used them in experience on how neighboring cells communicate. But after Mr. Defler, no one mentioned Henrietta. When I got my first computer in the mid-90s and started using the internet, I searched for information about her, but found only confused snippets. Most sites said her name was Helen Lane. Some said she died in her 30s. Others said the 40s, 50s, or even 60s. Some said she died in the 30s. Others said 40s, 50s, or even 60s. Some said ovarian cancer killed her. Others said breast and cervical cancer. Eventually, I tracked down a few magazine articles about her from the 70s. Ebony quoted Henrietta's husband saying, "All I remember is that she had this disease, and right after she died, they called me in the office wanting to get my permission to take a sample of some kind. I decided not to let them." Jet said the family was angry that Henrietta's cells were being sold for $25 a vial, and angry that articles had been published about the cells without their knowledge. It said, pounding in the back of their heads was a gnawing feeling that science and the press had taken advantage of them. The articles all ran photos of Henrietta's family, her oldest son sitting at his dining room table in Baltimore looking at a genetics textbook, her middle son in military uniform smiling and holding a baby, but one picture stood out more than any other. In it, Henrietta's daughter, Deborah Lacks, is surrounded by family, everyone smiling, arms around each other, eyes bright and excited, except Deborah. She stands in the foreground looking alone, almost as if someone pasted her in the photo after the fact. She's 26 years old and beautiful with short brown hair and cat-like eyes, but those eyes glare at the camera, hard and serious. The caption said the family had found out just a few months earlier that Henrietta's cells were still alive, yet at that point, she'd been dead for 25 years. All of the stories mentioned that scientists had begun doing research on Henrietta's children, but the Laxes didn't seem to know what the research was for. They said they were being tested to see if they had the cancer that killed Henrietta, but according to the reporters, scientists were studying the Lax family to learn more about Henrietta's cells. The stories quoted from her son, Lawrence, who wanted to know if the immortality of his mother's cells meant that he might live forever too, but one member of the family remained voiceless, Henrietta's daughter, Deborah. As I worked my way through graduate school studying writing, I became fixated on the idea of someday telling Henrietta's story. At one point, I even called directory assistants in Baltimore looking for Henrietta's husband, David Lacks, but he wasn't listed. I had the idea that I'd write a book that was a biography of both the cells and the woman they came from, someone's daughter, wife, and mother. I couldn't have imagined it then, but that phone call would mark the beginning of a decade-long adventure through scientific laboratories, hospitals, and mental institutions with a cast of characters that would include Nobel laureates, grocery store clerks, convicted felons, and a professional con artist. While trying to make sense of this history of cell culture and the complicated ethical debate surrounding the use of human tissue in research. I'd be accused of conspiracy and slammed into a wall, both physically and metaphorically, and I'd eventually find myself on the receiving end of something that looked a lot like an exorcism. I did eventually meet Deborah, who would turn out to be one of the strongest and most resilient women I've ever known. We form a deep personal bond, and slowly, without realizing it, I become a character in her story and she in mine. Deborah and I came from very different cultures. I grew up white and agnostic in the Pacific Northwest. Why? This white woman writing this book. Alright, let me give it a shot. I do usually preserve black author books for my story time, but more of my though. But I did say I was going to start to expand the things I read, and so unbeknownst to me, I didn't even look at the back. I didn't even read the back. Alright, Rebecca Skloot. The last name had me wondering. Let me not judge. Let me get through. Deborah and I came from a very different cultures. I grew up white and agnostic in the Pacific Northwest. My roots half New York Jew and half Midwestern Protestant. Deborah was a deeply religious black Christian from the South. I tended to leave the room when religion came up in conversation because it made me uncomfortable. Deborah's family tended toward preaching, faith healings, and sometimes voodoo. She grew up in a black neighborhood that was one of the poorest and most dangerous in the country. I grew up in a safe, quiet, middle-class neighborhood in a predominantly white city and went to high school with a total of 2 black students. I was a science journalist who referred to all things supernatural as woo-woo stuff. Deborah believed Henrietta's spirit lived on in her cells, controlling the life of anyone who crossed his path, including me. How else do you explain why your science teacher knew her real name when everyone else called her Helen Lane? Deborah would say. She was trying to get your attention. This thinking would apply to everything in my life. When I married while writing this book, it was because Henrietta wanted someone to take care of me while I worked. When I divorced, it was because she decided he was getting in the way of the book. When an editor who insisted I take the Lax family out of the book was injured in a mysterious accident, Deborah said that's what happens when you piss Henrietta off. The Laxists challenged everything I thought I knew about faith, science, journalism, and race. Ultimately, this book is the result. It's not only the story of HeLa cells and Henrietta Lacks, but of Henrietta's family, particularly Deborah, and their lifelong struggle to make peace with the existence of those cells and the science that made them possible. Deborah's voice. When people ask, it seems like people always be asking too, where I can't never get away from it. I say, yeah, that's right. My mother's name was Henrietta Lacks. She died in 1951. John Hopkins took her cells, and them cells are still living today, still multiplying, still growing and spreading if you don't keep them frozen. Science calls her HeLa. She's all over the world in medical facilities and all the computers and the internet everywhere. When I go to the doctor for my checkups, I always say my mother was HeLa. They all get excited, tell me stuff like how her cells help make my blood pressure medicines and antidepressant pills, and how all this important stuff in science happened because of her. But they don't ever explain more than just saying, yeah, your mother was on the moon. She been in nuclear bombs and made that polio vaccine. I really don't know how she did all that, but I guess I'm glad she did, because that means she helping lots of people. I think she would like that. But I have always thought it was strange. If our mother cells does so much for medicine, how come her family can't afford to see no doctors? Don't make no sense. People got rich off my mother without us even knowing about them taking her cells. Now we don't get a dime. I used to get so mad about that to where it made me sick and I had to take pills, but I don't got it in me no more to fight. I just want to know who my mother was. Alright, so I'm going to end there. That was the prologue to this book. And then we're going to get into part 1, chapter 1, the exam. It's not that long, but I'll get into it another day. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Again, if you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please go ahead and do that. Morgan Myers, or type in Storytime or more of mine. Or type in the name of this book and Morgan Myers, and it should come right up. All right, I appreciate y'all. I'll tune in with y'all again soon. Peace.